I will never forget the way the front door slammed behind me that night. The sound wasn't just wood against wood. It was the sound of finality, the sound of a sentence being passed. My own parents had just condemned me. "You'll never amount to anything, Catherine. Leave our house tonight and don't come back." Those words, sharp as shards of glass, cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. I stood on the porch, shivering, not because the night was cold, but because something inside me had frozen. My suitcase, a cheap, battered thing I had bought at a thrift store for a school trip, was at my feet. It wasn't packed with love or encouragement, only the bare minimum my mother had allowed me to take. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, my worn shoes, and a toothbrush. They hadn't even let me keep the blanket my grandmother had given me as a child. My mother's last words echoed as she shut the door in my face. "You don't deserve anything from us." Through the window, I saw Michael, my older brother, standing in the living room. He didn't speak. He didn't stop them. He just stood there, silent, watching me through the glass as if I were already a stranger. His face was blank, but I swear I caught a flicker of guilt, or maybe pity. But he didn't move, and that silence was louder than my parents' cruel voices. The street was empty. The houses around us were dark, except for the faint glow of televisions flickering behind curtains. I was 18, alone, and the world suddenly felt like an ocean I was too small to survive. I picked up the suitcase and started walking, each step heavier than the last, my tears blurring the road, until it seemed I was walking through water. As I reached the corner, memories of childhood rushed back, memories I had tried for years to bury. My parents had always favored Michael. He was the golden child, the pride of the family. Every trophy he won, every grade he achieved was celebrated with dinners and parties. And me? My achievements were dismissed as accidents, my efforts as failures. I had learned to stop showing them my grades, my sketches, my journals, anything that made me proud, because they only looked for flaws. Still, deep inside, I had always hoped that one day I could earn their love. But that night, as the shadow swallowed me, I finally understood. There had never been any love to earn. I wandered for hours, clutching my suitcase like a lifeline. I had no money in my pocket, just a few crumpled bills I had saved from babysitting jobs. I thought about going to a friend's house, but who would take in a girl her parents had thrown away? Shame burned in me hotter than hunger. When I finally sat on a park bench, the weight of exhaustion crushed me. I curled up, trying to make myself invisible. Every sound of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of a passing car, felt threatening. I had never been so aware of how fragile I was. I didn't sleep much. My body shook with cold and fear, but beneath all that was something else, something I hadn't expected. Anger. It started small, like a spark, but the more I thought of my parents' words, the more it grew. Anger that they had stripped me of dignity. Anger that Michael, the brother I once adored, had stood by in silence. Anger that I had believed for 18 years that I was unworthy. By morning, the anger had hardened into something else. Resolve. I was still broken, still lost, but a voice inside whispered, "They think you'll never amount to anything. Prove them wrong." That day, I began my new life. I had no home, no family, no plan, but I had something they had never given me: fire. And though I didn't know it then, that fire would carry me farther than I ever imagined. But as I walked away from the park, with the sun rising behind me and my suitcase dragging across cracked pavement, I couldn't shake the image of Michael's face at the window, silent, watching, choosing their side. That betrayal would haunt me, fuel me, and one day, though I couldn't yet imagine how, it would return to him in ways neither of us could foresee. And when that day came, he would stand before me in tears, begging for help, and I would remember this night, the night my own blood abandoned me. The first weeks after being thrown out of my parents' house felt like wandering through a fog of hunger and humiliation. I carried my suitcase everywhere, afraid to leave it behind, as if the worn-out clothes inside were the only proof that I still existed. The park bench became my first home. At night, I huddled there, staring at the stars that mocked me with their distance. The ground was unforgiving, the air heavy with dampness. I tried to convince myself that it was only temporary, but every dawn, when the city stirred awake, I felt invisible, like a ghost drifting among strangers. I learned quickly that survival demanded both courage and silence. At a diner on Maple Street, I swallowed my pride and asked the manager, a stout man named Frank, if I could wash dishes for a meal. He studied me with suspicion, then nodded. My hands, soft from school notebooks and sketchbooks, soon blistered in hot water, but when he placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast before me, tears burned in my eyes. Food had never tasted so alive. For a while, that diner became my lifeline. Frank wasn't kind, but he wasn't cruel either. He paid me in meals and sometimes slipped me a few coins when the night had been busy. I'd sit at the counter after closing, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the clatter of the kitchen. In that greasy smell of fried onions and burnt toast, I felt a strange sort of safety. But survival wasn't just about food. It was about hiding my pain. When I walked through the streets, I forced myself to keep my chin high, as if the suitcase I dragged wasn't a mark of shame. I avoided old classmates. I couldn't bear their questions or pity. At night, the fear returned. The fear of men's footsteps approaching in the dark, of losing what little I had, of never finding a way out. In those lonely hours, memories flooded me. I remembered birthdays where Michael's cake had been tall, decorated, glowing with candles, while mine had been a single cupcake on a chipped plate. I remembered the way my father, Richard, used to pat Michael's back after soccer games, while barely glancing at me even when I had won a school award. And my mother, Elaine, always with that cutting smile telling me, "You're just not like your brother, Catherine. Don't expect too much from life." They had starved me of affection long before they starved me of shelter. Yet, even as bitterness twisted inside me, I began to notice something else. Every rejection I faced, when I knocked on doors looking for work, when strangers brushed past me with disgust, hardened me. Each no became fuel, pushing me to keep trying, to scrape together enough coins to rent a room, to prove that I wasn't the worthless girl they had cast out. After 2 months of drifting, luck, or maybe fate, opened a door. A woman named Rosa, who worked at the diner, offered me a place to stay. "It's not much," she said. "Just a couch in my apartment, but you shouldn't be on the streets." She had kind eyes, the kind my mother never had. I moved in with her, clutching my suitcase like a child clutching a toy. That night, when I lay on her couch with a real roof over my head, I cried silently, the tears soaking into her borrowed pillow. Rosa became more than a stranger. She became my first real friend. She told me stories of her own struggles, of crossing the border with nothing but hope, of working 2 jobs to support her family. "People like us," she said one night as we ate beans and rice in her tiny kitchen, "we learn to fight harder, because we have no one to catch us when we fall." Her words carved themselves into me like scripture. Slowly, I saved money. Frank started paying me properly, and I picked up extra shifts cleaning offices. My body ached constantly, my fingers raw and cracked, but I carried that pain like a badge of honor. For every dollar I tucked into the jar under Rosa's couch, I felt closer to freedom. Still, I couldn't silence the ache in my chest. At night, I dreamed of Michael. I dreamed of that moment at the window, of his silence while my parents cast me out. Sometimes I woke up sweating, my heart pounding with rage. Other nights I woke with tears, wondering if he ever thought of me. Did he regret not speaking up? Did he ever feel the emptiness of my absence? I doubted it. From the little I heard through old neighbors, Michael was thriving. College paid for, a car gifted by our parents, weekends filled with parties. He lived the life they had denied me, the life they had decided he deserved and I did not. But even as the unfairness gnawed at me, a dangerous thought took root. If I survive this, I will never need them again. Not him. Not them. No one. I didn't know then that the same brother who ignored me would one day stand at my door, stripped of everything, begging for mercy. For now, I only knew hunger, exhaustion, and the first fragile sparks of independence, and I held on to those sparks as if they were fire in a world determined to freeze me. The jar under Rosa's couch filled slowly, painfully, with crumpled bills and tarnished coins. Each shift at the diner, every night scrubbing office floors until my back screamed, brought me a little closer. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I could build something from nothing, piece by piece, like stitching torn fabric back together with bleeding fingers. After 6 months, the jar was heavy enough to buy me the thing I had been craving more than food, more than comfort: independence. I still remember the day I found the listing. A crooked flyer pinned to the diner's bulletin board. Room for rent. Small, affordable. I tore it down so quickly my hands shook, terrified someone else might see it first. The room was in a crumbling old building on the edge of town, where the paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. The landlord, a balding man with eyes that darted like flies, showed me inside. It smelled faintly of mold and loneliness. The walls were stained, the window cracked, the radiator barely clinging to life, but it had a door with a lock that belonged to me. When I handed over the deposit, my hands trembled. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That first night, I lay on the thin mattress the landlord had left behind, staring at the ceiling, listening to the pipes groan like ghosts. My suitcase sat at the foot of the bed, my clothes neatly folded inside. For the first time since my parents had cast me out, I wasn't intruding in someone else's space, wasn't waiting for pity to run out. I belonged here, even if the walls whispered otherwise. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I smiled into the darkness. The room was ugly, broken, forgotten, but so was I, and together we were starting over. Over the next weeks, I made that room a sanctuary. I scrubbed the stains from the floor until my knuckles ached. I found a secondhand blanket at a thrift store, soft and faded, and draped it across the bed. On my dresser, an old crate I dragged from an alley, I placed a single candle. At night, when the flame flickered against the walls, it transformed the room into something warm, almost holy. I learned to stretch every coin. I lived on instant noodles and day-old bread, saving every spare dollar. The hunger was still there, but it was different now. Not the helpless hunger of a girl abandoned, but the chosen hunger of someone building a future. Every morning, as I locked the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "This is mine. They can never take this from me." And yet, despite the fragile piece of my new life, shadows of the past followed me. Sometimes, walking home at night, I imagined my parents' house. I pictured Michael sitting at the dinner table, laughing with them, his plate full while mine sat empty in memory. Did he ever wonder where I was? Did he ever feel the weight of silence pressing against him when he remembered my face at the window? One evening, exhausted from work, I collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. A thought pierced me like a blade. Maybe Michael wasn't haunted at all. Maybe he was happy, thriving, living the life they had always promised him. Maybe I had been forgotten. That realization both crushed me and set me free. If I was forgotten, then I owed them nothing. My life was no longer tied to their approval. And so, I began to dream. Not the fragile, hopeless dreams of a child, but fierce ones. The kind born in the ashes of rejection. I wanted more than survival. I wanted success so undeniable that one day, if fate ever brought me face to face with them again, they would see the daughter they had thrown away and know they had been wrong. I started keeping a notebook, scribbling ideas late at night under the candlelight. Plans, goals, fragments of a future I refused to let slip away. My hands smelled of bleach from cleaning jobs. My stomach growled with hunger, but my mind burned with visions. The room became more than shelter. It was a cocoon. Every scrape on the wall, every crack in the plaster reminded me of myself, broken, but holding together. Each night, as the city outside sank into silence, I felt something inside me stirring, a quiet strength, sharp and unyielding. Still, there were nights when loneliness pressed down on me so heavily I thought it would suffocate me. I'd curl under the thrift store blanket, tears soaking the pillow, whispering into the dark. Why wasn't I enough? No answer ever came, but the silence hardened me further. By the time the first snow fell that year, my room had transformed me. I was no longer the girl who had been cast out like trash. I was Catherine, the girl with a locked door, a notebook full of plans, and a fire in her chest that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. I didn't know yet how high that fire would carry me. I only knew one truth. I would never again beg for their acceptance. And someday, when Michael's perfect world began to crack, he would come to me. And on that day, I would remember the walls of this little room, the hunger, the silence, and the vow I whispered to myself. They said I'd never amount to anything. Watch me. It started with an idea I almost discarded. One night, after finishing a 12-hour shift at the diner, I sat on my thin mattress, exhausted, rubbing my blistered hands. My notebook lay open, pages smudged with graphite, filled with scattered thoughts, dreams, and plans. I had been scribbling business ideas for weeks, little ventures I could start with almost no money. Most seemed ridiculous, impossible, but there was one that refused to leave my mind. A small, online design business, creating handmade home decor for people who wanted something personal, something real. I had no money for materials, no contacts, no website, but I had skills. I could sew, paint, craft with precision, and more importantly, I had persistence born of necessity. Hunger had a way of sharpening one's mind. Hunger and betrayal. I borrowed a sewing machine from Rosa, who had begun to trust me more than ever. She didn't know the depths of my past, but she sensed the fire in me, the intensity in my gaze. I spent nights teaching myself online tutorials, learning how to photograph my pieces, how to price them, how to write descriptions that would make strangers care. Every stitch was a prayer, every brushstroke a whisper to the universe. I will survive. I will rise. The first pieces were crude. My hands trembled. My confidence wavered. But when I posted the photos on a small online marketplace, someone, an anonymous stranger, bought a hand-painted vase for $30. $30. I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Validation. Real, tangible validation. I could create. I could sell. I could exist outside the suffocating walls of my parents' disapproval. Orders trickled in, then grew. I spent sleepless nights fulfilling them, sacrificing food, sleep, comfort, all of it, for the thrill of independence. I no longer worried about walking the streets, about cold nights, about my parents' scorn. I worried only about the possibilities ahead, and that fire inside me grew hotter with each passing day. Meanwhile, Michael thrived in the way our parents always wanted him to. Stories from neighbors trickled in. He had received a promotion at a prestigious law firm, bought a car he didn't need, and hosted parties I could only imagine. Every update about him sent a pang through me. Not jealousy, exactly, but a recognition of what could have been, if I had been their favorite. Yet, with each pang came resolve. He had been given everything, and I had been given nothing. And still, here I was, carving my path from scraps. The contrast fueled me. Every morning I looked at my small, crooked room and felt pride. Here, amid peeling paint and cracked plaster, I was creating a life they could never control. Here, my worth wasn't measured by their approval, but by my own hands and my own vision. Then came the breakthrough. A small boutique shop in the city agreed to carry my pieces. They had seen my online work, liked the authenticity, and offered me a chance I had never dared to dream of. I remember the day I received the email. I screamed into my empty apartment, startling the cat that Rosa sometimes let me keep on weekends. I laughed and cried at the same time. The first real acknowledgement of my talent, and it had nothing to do with Michael, nothing to do with my parents, and everything to do with me. Orders multiplied. Word spread. People praised my creativity, my dedication, my attention to detail. I began to think of myself not as the girl who had been thrown out, but as someone who could survive anything. The anger I had carried for so long began to refine itself into ambition. But success brought new challenges. Mistakes became costly, deadlines overwhelming. I barely slept, barely ate, barely had time to breathe. Yet even in exhaustion, I felt alive in a way I never had in my parents' house. Their home had been suffocating, hollow, and cold. Here, every struggle, every failure, every small victory was mine. No one had handed it to me. No one had paved the way. And still, in quiet moments, I thought of Michael. He was my brother, the one person I had once loved unconditionally. He was thriving now, while I had clawed my way from the ground. I tried not to resent him, tried not to let memories of that night at the window poison my gratitude, but I couldn't deny it. There was a seed of curiosity, a faint whisper of anticipation. If life could turn for me, could it ever turn against him? I didn't know it yet, but the universe had a way of answering that question sooner than I could imagine. For now, I focused on what I could control: my craft, my clients, my growing reputation. The little room, the peeling paint, the crooked ceiling. It was all mine. And with each order shipped, with each praise received, I felt an unfamiliar power coursing through me, the power to survive, to thrive, and one day, perhaps, to take everything they had denied me. And I knew, without a doubt, that the world would notice me. I had tasted the first spark of success, but the world quickly reminded me that it didn't give rewards lightly. Every step forward brought new obstacles, and every victory seemed to demand a higher price. Clients canceled orders last minute, shipments were delayed, and mistakes, small human mistakes, loomed over me like storms waiting to break. It would have been enough to break anyone, but I wasn't just anyone. I remember one particular day that could have crushed me. A boutique in the city that had promised to feature my designs suddenly sent an email. After careful consideration, we've decided to go in another direction. Thank you for your time. My chest tightened, my stomach lurched, and for a moment, I felt the old, familiar hollow of rejection. The same hollow I had felt when my parents spat me out at 18. I stared at my laptop, disbelief mingling with anger. My hand shook, the paper in front of me crumpling beneath my grip. And yet, beneath the weight of disappointment, something stirred. A tiny ember, almost imperceptible, whispered, "They think you'll fail. Prove them wrong." I poured every ounce of frustration into my work. Sleepless nights blurred into early mornings. Every vase, every hand-painted frame, every stitched pillow became sharper, cleaner, more extraordinary than before. I had learned to turn anger into fuel. I had learned that rejection was not a sentence, but a challenge. During that time, Rosa became my confidant. She watched me, night after night, my hands stained with paint and my eyes hollow from exhaustion. "Catherine," she said softly one night as we ate beans and rice, "you can't do this alone, but I've never seen anyone work like you. Keep going." Her words were a balm and a spark at the same time. She didn't coddle me. She reminded me of my strength. I remembered the faces of my parents, Elaine's sharp smile, Richard's dismissive shrug, Michael, standing at the window silently while I was thrown into the night. Each memory ignited the fire inside me. Not vengeance, not yet, but an unbreakable determination to prove that their judgment of me had been meaningless. Small victories began to follow the chaos. An anonymous buyer ordered 20 hand-painted candle holders. A local magazine ran a short feature on my small venture. Each success was a flicker, then a flame. I started working with suppliers directly, negotiating prices, managing orders. My tiny apartment, once a haven of fragile independence, became a workshop, a studio, a command center. I was no longer surviving. I was creating a life. And yet, Michael's world still loomed over mine. Stories reached me of his nights in lavish restaurants, of business dinners where his parents smiled and praised him endlessly. They had given him every advantage, and he had never learned to fight for anything. I could have felt envy, but instead, I felt a grim, almost clinical curiosity. If I could claw my way out of nothing, what would happen when life finally tested him? A mentor appeared at an unlikely moment. I met him at a small networking event for local artisans. A man named Julian, mid-40s, sharp-suited, with eyes that seemed to see straight through people. He examined my work with an intensity that made me nervous. "You have talent," he said finally, "but talent isn't enough. You need strategy, you need vision, you need someone to show you how to expand." He offered to guide me, not for free, but for a percentage of profits once my business grew. I hesitated. Trust had always been dangerous. People had always turned away, abandoned me, or judged me. But I saw in Julian the rare quality of someone who could recognize fire when it burned. I agreed, and from that moment, my trajectory changed. Every setback became a lesson. Each rejection sharpened my instincts. I learned to negotiate, to strategize, to market not just products, but myself. I began to dream bigger. I imagined storefronts, collaborations, exhibitions, recognition. Not just survival, but triumph. At night, after long hours, I would collapse onto my mattress, my body trembling from fatigue, yet my mind ablaze. I often thought of Michael in those moments, wondering if he had ever felt the raw, desperate hunger I had. Did he even understand what it meant to fight for every dollar, every small step, every inch of dignity. I realized then that life wasn't about fairness. It was about endurance, about how much fire you could carry when the world tried to extinguish it. And I carried it relentlessly. The truth was simple. They had underestimated me. My parents, Michael, the boutiques that rejected me, all of them. But fire has a way of spreading, even in the darkest corners, and mine was just beginning. I didn't know it yet, but the world was about to test Michael in ways he could never have imagined. And when he finally came to me, he would encounter the very strength and fire they had all denied him. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day when the city feels gray and unforgiving, and every puddle reflects your doubts as sharply as it reflects the sky. I had been up since 5, hand-stitching pillowcases and painting delicate vases, when my phone buzzed with an email that made my hands freeze mid-stroke. We would like to feature your work in our National Design Showcase. All expenses paid. I read it 3 times, each time expecting the words to dissolve, as if I had imagined them. But they didn't. My chest swelled with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. I was going to be seen, not just by strangers, not just in my tiny online corner, but on a stage that could change everything. The days leading up to the showcase were a blur. I painted until my arms ached, perfected every brush stroke, adjusted every stitch until it felt flawless. My apartment, once a refuge, became a studio, a chaotic gallery of my life's work. I worked late into the nights. My only companions the flickering candle, the hum of the radiator, and the faint rustle of the city outside. Julian, my mentor, was a constant presence. He was meticulous, sharp, often impatient, but his guidance had become invaluable. "You can't just create, Catherine," he said one evening, his eyes intense. "You have to present yourself, own your story, let them feel what you've survived, not just what you make." And so I did. Each piece carried a story, threads of loneliness stitched into pillows, brushstrokes born from nights spent hungry and cold. Every item whispered resilience. Every vase, every handcrafted frame shouted survival. The showcase itself was overwhelming. The hall smelled of polished wood and new beginnings. Designers moved among each other with a confidence I had only begun to feel. I stood in the corner, my hands clammy, my heart racing, my body trembling with both fear and anticipation. And then it happened. People began to stop. They leaned closer to my work, murmuring praise, admiration. One by one, strangers smiled, took photos, asked questions, and in their eyes I saw what I had always longed for: recognition. Not pity, not familial obligation, recognition. The culmination came when the head judge, a well-known designer whose work I had studied endlessly, approached me. He inspected my vases, ran his fingers lightly over my stitched pillows, and finally said, with a rare warmth, "You've built something extraordinary from nothing. This is the kind of talent that refuses to be denied." I blinked back tears, the weight of every rejection, every cold night, every insult from my parents crashing over me in waves. I realized in that moment, I had survived everything they had thrown at me. I had endured the shame, the hunger, the doubt, and I had risen above it. When I returned home, the city soaked from the rain, I felt different. I felt unstoppable. My room, my little sanctuary, seemed larger somehow, filled with the echoes of my triumph. I allowed myself to imagine a future where I didn't just survive, but thrived, where Michael's privilege could no longer overshadow my own accomplishments. And yet, I couldn't ignore the whispers of the past. Michael, my brother, who had been handed everything I had been denied, still existed in the world I had left behind. I had heard from neighbors that he had been involved in a risky investment, that he had borrowed money recklessly. I tried not to care. I told myself his failures were not my concern. But deep down, a part of me was curious. Would the world test him the way it had tested me? I spent the evening reflecting on the journey I had taken. The girl thrown into the night with nothing but a suitcase, and a dream had become a woman capable of conquering far more than her parents had ever imagined. I remembered the sharp words, the slamming door, Michael's silence at the window, and I realized that my fire, the one they had tried to extinguish, was not just survival, it was transformation. That fire, I knew, would have its reckoning. Life had a way of balancing its scales, and though I didn't yet know how, I sensed that Michael's downfall would intersect with mine. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel but precise sense of timing. For now, I allowed myself one moment of quiet triumph. I poured a cup of coffee, sat on my small bed, and stared out the window at the city lights blurred by rain. The cold that had once wrapped around me like chains now felt distant. I could almost hear the echo of my parents' voices, the disbelief, the dismissive laughter they had aimed at me. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I had found my place in the world. I had found my strength. And soon, very soon, I would discover whether the brother who once stood silently as I was cast out could survive the storms of his own making. Until then, I would continue to build, to create, to burn brighter than the shadows they had left behind. The knock on my door came late at night, when the streets were empty, and the city felt like it belonged only to shadows. I had been finishing a batch of orders, my hands coated in paint, my heart still racing from the day's successes, when a voice shattered the quiet. "Catherine, please." I froze. The voice was unmistakable. Michael, my brother, the one who had stood at the window the night I was thrown out, silent, watching me disappear into the dark. My heart twisted into knots, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and something I couldn't quite name. I opened the door to find him there, his expensive suit rumpled, his usually confident posture slumped, eyes red and wet with tears. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the privileges he had taken for granted had been stripped away. And he was begging. You need to help me," he whispered, voice cracking. For a moment, I didn't move. I just looked at him. The brother I had once adored, the boy who had never lifted a finger to defend me, now stood broken before me, and all I felt was the echo of that long-ago night, the slam of the door, my suitcase at my feet, his silence at the window. "You left me," I said finally, my voice low and trembling. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to be thrown out, to walk through the night alone, to survive on scraps and kindness from strangers while you lived in comfort?" He flinched, guilt flashing in his eyes, but it didn't erase the humiliation of the moment. I didn't know what to do," he said, voice weak. I thought someone would—" "No," I interrupted sharply. "You thought someone else would fix it. That's what you always thought. That's what they taught you. Privilege. That the world would bend to you. But it doesn't. Not like it bends to me." He sank onto the floor of my tiny apartment, shoulders shaking, and for the first time, I saw the fear that had eluded him for years. Michael had always been confident, because he had never truly been tested. Now he was being tested, and life offered him no mercy. I felt a strange combination of triumph and sorrow. This was not joy, exactly, but a reckoning. The boy who had once received everything without effort was learning the taste of failure, and I was the one he came to. "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I lost everything. The investments, the money, the house. Mom and Dad won't help me anymore. You have to. You have to guide me. Please." I felt my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to let him face the consequences he had ignored for so long. Another part of me, the part that had survived hunger, loneliness, and rejection, felt the stirrings of compassion. But compassion didn't erase memory. It didn't erase the nights I had cried alone, the relentless fight to survive while he lounged in luxury. "You want my help?" I asked, my voice calm, but sharp enough to cut through the room like glass. "After everything? After standing by while I was cast out? Do you think that kind of trust is free?" He nodded, desperate, shame written into every line of his face. I don't know who else to turn to. Please, Catherine." I looked around my apartment, the small room that had been my sanctuary, my crucible, my proof that I could survive anything. Every scar on the walls, every crack in the ceiling, every blistered hand that had built this life was a testament. And now, this broken boy stood before me, the world finally demanding he learn the lesson I had been forced to learn years ago. "I saved myself, Michael," I said, voice steady. "I clawed my way from nothing. You were given everything, and now you're here, begging at my door. You get one choice. You can learn from me, and maybe survive this, or you can walk out and let the world crush you completely. The choice is yours, but don't think it will be easy." He nodded again, swallowing hard. and I could see the weight of reality finally settling on him. This was the first time in his life he had been powerless, and he hated it. I didn't pity him, not entirely. I felt something else, an odd sense of satisfaction, yes, but also the recognition that the tables had turned. He was now vulnerable in the exact way I had been, and life was showing him the truth he had ignored. I sat down across from him, letting the silence stretch. Tears dried on his cheeks, his breathing ragged, and in that moment, I understood something profound. This was not about revenge. It was about justice. Life had a way of teaching the lessons we refused to learn. Michael's collapse was the catalyst for the reckoning that had been building for years. The reckoning not just with him, but with everything I had endured. And as I looked at him, broken and trembling on my floor, I realized that the fire that had carried me through the darkness was now a light he would have to follow, or be consumed by. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my power. Not the money, not the business, not even the success. It was this, the ability to shape my life, and perhaps shape the lessons of the brother who had once abandoned me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. When Michael first appeared at my doorstep, broken and desperate, I felt a storm inside me, a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and an unspoken longing to see him understand the world he had taken for granted. Watching him slump there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hands shaking, I realized that the tables had shifted so completely that life itself seemed to pause in anticipation. I had spent 3 years clawing my way from nothing, building a life in the shadow of rejection, scraping by on scraps of kindness, and turning every insult from my parents into fuel. And now, the very brother who had silently watched me be cast into the night had arrived, humbled and trembling, dependent on me for guidance, for survival, for the lifeline he had never given me. It was almost poetic, and I felt the icy thrill of that symmetry course through my veins. I stood in my small apartment, the walls I had painstakingly made my own surrounding me, and I let him stew in the weight of his helplessness for a moment, letting him feel the gravity of his arrogance and the price of his privilege. He had no idea what it meant to be hungry for 3 nights straight, to face the city alone with only a suitcase and the fire in your chest, to endure humiliation that seared your soul. Yet here he was, and the universe, cruel as ever, had demanded that he learn lessons I had learned through blood and tears. "I can't believe you're standing there," I said finally, voice steady but cutting. "After all these years, and you think a few tears will undo what happened? You think walking in here begging will make up for your silence when I needed you most? Do you even remember that night, Michael? Do you remember the door slamming behind me, the suitcase in my hands, your face at the window, frozen?" His eyes dropped, shame curdling in the air between us, but he remained seated, too weary to argue. "I remember," he muttered, voice cracking. "But I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I thought—" "Scared?" I interrupted, feeling the rage rise like a tide. "You were scared? I was alone, 18, and I walked into the night without a home, without food, without anyone to care if I lived or died. And you, my brother, watched from the window while I was thrown out like I was nothing. That is what I call fear, Michael. What you feel now is nothing compared to that. Now, you are learning the truth of life, and it is unforgiving. Do you understand that?" He nodded weakly, swallowing, his ego stripped to the raw, trembling man before me. The irony was not lost on me. He had thrived on my parents' favoritism, grown fat on their praise, bathed in the privilege I was denied, and yet here he was, humbled by the same unforgiving world that had once tested only me. I felt an almost cruel satisfaction in watching him grapple with the consequences of decisions he hadn't made thoughtfully, relying all his life on a cushion of wealth and entitlement that had now vanished. But power is a strange thing, and as I looked at him there, I realized that the strength I had gained through pain gave me more than just revenge. It gave me choice. Michael needed guidance, yes, but he also needed to face the bitter truth that life does not favor those who wait passively for it to bestow its gifts. I could give him the tools, the mentorship, the strategy, but only if he proved he was willing to fight. And I needed to see that spark in him, the same spark that had sustained me through countless nights of fear and hunger. I studied his face, noting the subtle tremors of guilt and desperation, the raw vulnerability that had been foreign to him all his life. Could he rise to the challenge? Could he survive without the parental safety net he had taken for granted? The answer was unclear, and I felt the tension of possibility hanging between us like a storm cloud ready to break. I wanted to help him, yes, but only on my terms. Only if he understood that the world had no obligation to him, and only if he faced the mirror of truth I had learned to stare into unflinchingly every day. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every moment that had led me here. The nights on park benches, the long shifts at diners, the blisters on my hands, the small victories, the sting of rejection, and the fire that had propelled me from abandoned girl to someone capable of building a life that no one could take from me. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice calm now, resonant with authority. "I will help you, but you must follow my instructions completely. You must understand that every decision I give you is based on the lessons I learned through suffering, through failure, and through relentless perseverance. If you fail, it will be your fault entirely, and you will face the consequences. Do you understand?" His head nodded repeatedly, tears streaking down his face, desperation painting every line of his features. I saw fear, yes, but I also glimpsed the first flicker of comprehension. He was beginning to realize the magnitude of the life he had squandered and the arduous path he now faced. I felt a strange sense of triumph, tempered by a whisper of something softer, responsibility. This was my brother, the boy I had once loved, and now he was entirely dependent on the fire I had cultivated in myself. I realized that power was not about vengeance. It was about teaching, guiding, and setting boundaries. I could reshape his understanding of the world, show him the consequences of entitlement, and perhaps, even if only partially, instill the resilience he had never possessed. I also realized, with a sinking clarity, that he might never fully understand the depth of my pain, the nights I had cried myself to sleep, the hunger that gnawed at my insides, the isolation I endured. But he would understand enough to know that he could no longer walk through life untouched by struggle, that the walls of privilege could crumble, and that the people you dismiss today may become the very ones who determine your tomorrow. As the night deepened, I began laying out a plan for him, a path that would force accountability, discipline, and reflection. He listened, trembling, nodding, absorbing each instruction with the gravity of a man who had finally recognized that life did not bend to him as it once had. And I felt the rush of power that comes from having survived unimaginable adversity, the knowledge that the fire that had carried me through the darkest nights was now a light that could illuminate or burn, depending on the choices he made. And I realized that the true reckoning was not vengeance. It was the shaping of a life once squandered, now being rebuilt under the gaze of someone who had truly earned her strength. The night stretched long, shadows stretching across my walls, flickering candlelight dancing over our faces, and in that darkness, I understood a truth I had long suspected. The world was neither kind nor fair, but it was mercilessly just. And now, for the first time, Michael would learn that justice was not a lesson given lightly, and I would be there, standing firm, fire in my chest, ready to see if he could survive the crucible that had forged me. I had known for years that my family hid more than they admitted. The sharp smiles, the lavish parties, the words they carefully chose, all of it felt rehearsed, like a play designed to protect them from the truth. But it wasn't until Michael's collapse that I began to understand the depths of the deception, the lies that had been stacked upon lies, like fragile dominoes just waiting for the right push to tumble. One evening, after hours of working with Michael, guiding him through the basics of survival and accountability, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. It was yellowed, brittle at the edges, and smelled faintly of old paper and secrets. My name was written in a familiar, elegant hand, my mother's hand, but the tone of the writing was different, more formal, almost cold. I hesitated, a shiver running down my spine before tearing it open. Inside were documents, bank statements, contracts, letters that revealed truths I had never imagined. My parents had been hiding wealth, investments, and property not out of generosity, but out of meticulous control, carefully ensuring that everything I might inherit was legally inaccessible. The house, the car, the college funds, they had existed, yes, but only for Michael, and they had made sure I never knew the extent of it. My stomach churned as I realized the depth of the betrayal. The night I had been thrown out, they could have helped me, could have protected me, but they had chosen cruelty instead, hiding behind their veneer of propriety while manipulating the fate of their children. As I pored over the documents, my hands trembling, the weight of years of anger, abandonment, and survival crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I had thought their rejection was simply parental preference, a twisted judgment of my worth, but it was far more calculated than I ever suspected. Every insult, every cold dismissal, every statement of my inadequacy had been part of a design to break me, to ensure that Michael remained the favored child, the golden son. And yet, even as fury consumed me, I felt a strange clarity settling over the chaos of my emotions. The truth, once hidden, now gave me power. Knowledge was leverage, and for the first time, I saw the blueprint of their manipulation. I could use it. I could shape the outcome. I could make the injustice tangible in ways they would never expect. When Michael saw me staring at the papers, his face etched with exhaustion and dawning comprehension, I realized that he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his own ignorance. He had lived comfortably, naively assuming the world and my parents would protect him, and yet he had never questioned the fairness, the cruelty, or the secrecy that had governed our lives. Now, faced with the unraveling of his own stability, he was forced to confront truths he had been shielded from all his life, and he looked to me, not with defiance, not with entitlement, but with desperate dependence. He had nowhere else to turn. The universe had finally balanced the scales, and the weight of my own suffering now became a tool for both teaching and revelation. I could have turned him away, walked out of the room, let him learn the hard way in solitude, but I saw something in him, a chance for transformation, a chance for him to understand, perhaps painfully, what it meant to be human in the absence of privilege. The documents also revealed something more personal, more insidious. My parents had actively undermined opportunities I might have had. Applications for scholarships were lost, letters of recommendation never sent, jobs quietly denied with subtle manipulations behind the scenes. My rejection had not been random or inevitable. It had been engineered. Michael had been elevated at my expense. I felt the heat of injustice rise inside me, a familiar flame that had driven me through every hardship. And yet, as I stared at the papers, I realized that the fire that had fueled my survival had also prepared me for this moment. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't at the mercy of their deceit anymore. I could act, and the reckoning was not far off. I began to confront Michael with the truth in measured pieces. At first, he struggled to comprehend the depth of our parents' manipulation. He argued, tried to rationalize, pleaded that he had never asked for favoritism, that he had only ever followed their guidance. But I could see the cracks forming in his understanding, the first glimpses of guilt, the dawning realization that his entire life of entitlement had been built on the suffering of his sister. For the first time, he felt small, vulnerable, exposed, and I saw the weight of his own privilege, the irresponsibility, the naivete, finally pressing down on him like the same unforgiving world that had tested me for 3 relentless years. As the evening deepened and the city lights blurred against the window pane, I felt a strange satisfaction, a complicated emotion that mingled relief, triumph, and a hint of sadness. I had survived everything they had done to me, endured their cruelty and calculated malice, and had emerged not just intact, but formidable. I could now see the full scope of their deception, and I could use it, if necessary, to ensure that justice, harsh, unflinching justice, was done. The fire that had once sustained me through sleepless nights of fear and hunger had transformed into a controlled, precise instrument. It was not merely revenge I sought, it was recognition of truth, exposure of lies, and the reshaping of a family that had for too long thrived on illusion. And so, as Michael sat across from me, overwhelmed and chastened, I realized the final phase of my journey was approaching. The confrontation with my parents, the exposure of the lies, the reckoning of years of manipulation and cruelty, all of it was inevitable. I felt the trembling anticipation of what was to come, knowing that the fire that had carried me through the shadows was now ready to illuminate the truths they had worked so hard to conceal. Michael, humbled and dependent, was only the beginning. The tables had turned and the moment of truth was imminent. I felt the weight of my journey settle into a singular, unshakable certainty. No one who had underestimated me would walk away untouched, and the legacy of deception that had once bound me would finally be shattered under the force of my survival, my ingenuity, and my relentless determination. The day I had imagined for years arrived with the weight of inevitability. The same house that had once rejected me, the house where my parents' cruel laughter had echoed, now felt small and fragile under the shadow of truth. I drove up the long driveway, Michael beside me, pale and tense, every mile filled with anticipation. The once familiar facade, the white pillars, the manicured lawn, the windows that had framed my helpless gaze so many nights ago, now seemed hollow, almost theatrical, like a stage set for the final act. Michael's hands trembled as he gripped the dashboard, his silence deafening. I didn't need to speak. The journey alone conveyed the gravity of what was about to unfold. We were returning not as children, not as obedient pawns of our parents' illusions, but as forces reshaped by hardship, knowledge, and relentless survival. When we stepped through the front door, Elaine and Richard's expressions shifted, recognition morphing instantly into shock. Their smiles froze, their eyes flickered in confusion and disbelief. Michael had warned them, tried to cushion the blow, but it didn't matter. I didn't come for apologies or recognition. I came with the truth, backed by evidence they could not deny, and by the presence of a brother who had finally tasted the consequences of their favoritism. I carried the envelope, the one filled with decades of hidden bank statements, letters, contracts, and proofs of the manipulation they had employed to control our lives. Every document was a dagger of exposure, a precise instrument of accountability, and I placed it deliberately on the marble countertop, letting the silence stretch and crack around us. Elaine's lips parted, a sharp intake of breath breaking through her stunned composure. "Catherine, she began, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "Don't," I said firmly, the words crisp with authority. "There is nothing you can say that can undo what you did. There is nothing polite or clever enough to mask the years of lies, favoritism, and cruelty. Every scholarship I was denied, every opportunity erased, every insult you ever hurled at me, you engineered it. And now, it is time for truth." Richard shifted uncomfortably, the arrogance that had always cloaked him peeling away like old wallpaper. I saw the sudden awareness in their eyes that they were no longer in control, that their carefully constructed world was now vulnerable, exposed, and accountable to the consequences of their own design. Michael stepped forward, his voice trembling, but gaining strength. "Mom, Dad, I understand now. Everything I had, everything you gave me. It wasn't because I was special. It was because Catherine was denied. And now I see how wrong it was." He swallowed, his hands shaking, and I realized that he had fully grasped the depth of the deception. His tears were no longer mere desperation. They were an acknowledgement of reality. They had built him up at my expense, and now he was finally confronted by the truth. I let the silence linger, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. This was not vengeance in the petty sense. It was justice, precise and unyielding. I had survived, succeeded, and grown stronger while they had underestimated me. And now, their own child stood beside me, humbled, aware, and unwilling to be manipulated again. I saw their faltering composure, the way their eyes darted, searching for escape, for some clever turn of phrase to regain dominance, but none existed. All the power belonged to me, built painstakingly through years of endurance, suffering, and self-discipline. I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook, the pages filled with notes, plans, and evidence of my accomplishments. I laid them on top of the envelope. "Look at this," I said. "Every order, every client, every recognition I earned with my own hands, without your help, without your guidance, while you denied me everything. I survived the night you cast me out. I built a life from nothing, and now I am standing here. I am the person you told would never amount to anything. And here I am. Do you understand? Here I am." Elaine's face was pale, Richard's jaw tight, their composure shattered by the undeniable weight of facts. Michael looked at them with a mixture of disappointment and sorrow, and I realized that the reversal of fortune was complete. They could no longer hide behind the facade of parental authority, no longer manipulate, no longer dictate. The truth had risen, unstoppable and exacting. I stepped back and let the moment linger. I didn't need to speak further. The documents, the evidence, the presence of Michael, humbled and transformed, conveyed more than words could. The years of denial, cruelty, and favoritism were exposed fully, irreversibly, and in that moment, I felt a profound sense of release. This was not merely for me. It was a reckoning for the system of deceit, a demonstration that manipulation and cruelty have limits, and that resilience, determination, and the relentless pursuit of truth can overturn even the most calculated oppression. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, resonant, and unwavering. I am done asking for validation. I am done hoping for recognition, but I am here to show you that the truth cannot be hidden forever. Michael has learned, as I have, that life does not bend to privilege alone, and now, you must confront the consequences of the choices you made, the opportunities you denied, and the suffering you caused. This is the reckoning. It has been long overdue, and there is no escape. I turned to Michael, my brother who had once been complicit in silence, now my ally, my witness. We survived, I said softly, almost tenderly, and now the world will see what you refused to acknowledge. The power you thought you held was never yours to keep, and the girl you abandoned has risen above it all. They remained silent, the weight of comprehension pressing down. I had finally reclaimed everything they had tried to deny me, not just property, wealth, or recognition, but authority, respect, and the undeniable proof of survival against impossible odds. And as I looked at them, I felt an unshakable calm. I had endured, I had fought, and I had triumphed. The fire that had carried me through the darkest nights burned brighter than ever, illuminating the truth, the lies, and the final reckoning that would forever change the dynamics of our family. I stepped out of the room, Michael beside me, leaving them to absorb the weight of their own deception. The future belonged to us now, the sister who had been cast out, and the brother who had finally learned humility. And as the door closed behind us, I felt the last echoes of the past slip away, leaving only the certainty of a life reclaimed, a fire that could not be extinguished, and a reckoning that had been inevitable from the moment I first walked into the night at 18.